Yeah, please go ahead. Hare Krishna.
Okay, text 40. Indriyani manobuddhir
Indriyani manobodhir
asyadhisthanamuchyate
yasya dhittanam uchyate
eter vimohayate esa
etar vimohyate yesa
jnanam ardya dehinam.
jnanam abritya dehinam.
Translation: the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Kanchan, for reading. So Mukund is going to read next. So will he read the same verse, Prabhuji, or he can go for next?
Next verse. Maybe we can read next verse.
Mukund, go ahead.
Text 41. Tasmatam indriyanyado
Tasmatam indriyani yado
niyamya bharatasabha
niyama bharatarsava
apamanam prajahinam
papamanam prajahiyanam
jnana vijnana nashanam.
jnana vijnana nasanam.
Translation: therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning curb of this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mukund, for reading. Next verse. Sabhi go for next verse. Tyagu Prabhuji.
Yes, please. Let's go ahead.
Yes, Ji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Devi.
Text 42. Indriyani parayani yahur
Indriyani paryani ahur
indriye baya pranam mana
indriya paramana
manasastu parabuddhir
manasastu parabuddhir
yo buddhe paratastusta.
Yo buddhe
paratastusa.
Translation: the working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And the soul is even higher than the intelligence. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Ji.
43 is the last one. So just for the reading purpose, let's do that.
Yeah.
So
Narasimha Prabhu can go ahead.
Narasimha Prabhu. Yeah, Prabhuji.
Evam buddhe param buddhva
Evam
Evam
buddhe
buddhe para buddhva
samstabhyat manam atmana
samstapya manam atmana
jahishatrum mahabaho
Jahi
Jahi
Shatrum
Satrum
Mahabaho
Mahabaho
kamarupam durasadam.
kamarupam durasadam.
Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for reading. So, text number 40. I will also read for my purification. Indriyani manobudhir
Indriyani manobuddhi
asyadhishtanam uchyate
asyadhishtanam uchyate
etar vimohyati yesa
ete vimohayati esha
Jnanam abritya dehinam.
Jnanam avritya dehinam.
And the translation by His Divine Grace Abhay Charna Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting place of this lust. Through them, lust covered the real knowledge of the living entity and bewildered him. Hare Krishna. So,
Anybody else?
I think
Okay.
we are the participant.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and basically discuss 40 because there is a lot actually of matter in all of these verses. So
Yeah.
we'll probably focus on one. So we'll start with the invocation prayer. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Umminitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadhati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhascha Kipasindhubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right, so so in this text 40, Indriyani Manobuddhi Asya Dishtanamuchyate Eter Vimohati Esha Jnanam Avritya Dehinam. So Krishna is now explaining to us, to Arjun, where the enemy is located. The enemy is lust, and Krishna is explaining to Arjun that in order to make spiritual progress, we have to conquer this enemy of lust. But if you want to conquer, then you should know where to find him. If you don't know where to find him, how will you attack him and how will you handle him? So Krishna is explaining that the lust resides in the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. And through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So again, you see that picture of the horses, the chariot, the passenger in the chariot, that comes to mind. So the passenger who is in the chariot, that is the soul. And does anybody remember the senses are what?
Senses are the string, that rope.
The senses are the horses.
Horses, yeah.
And then mind is the rope, the reins.
Yeah.
And then the intelligence.
Intelligence which controls that.
Anybody remembers what the intelligence is?
The chariot driver.
That's right. Yeah.
The driver or the soul.
There you go, Tiago. Yeah. The driver is the intelligence and the soul is the passenger. So, yeah. So he's the passenger or the owner of the chariot, basically. And so the intelligence is the driver. And so just like if we have a driver who's working for us, same way the intelligence is our driver, is working for us. Now, the intelligence should be listening to the soul, because the soul is the proprietor. Intelligence should be listening to as an obedient employee. But right now it is the other way around. Krishna says that because the intelligence is not strong, spiritually not strong, therefore it cannot control the reins, the ropes properly. And because it cannot control those properly, the horses are running here and there everywhere. The senses are going here and there everywhere. You see? And so that is the meaning of when he says that the intelligence through them, meaning through senses, mind, and intelligence, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So in other words, when the driver is not listening to the owner, the body is going here and there everywhere, just listening to the senses. Horses are saying, do this, okay, do this, do that. And so what happens? We incur sinful reactions. Because of those reactions, we suffer. And so that is why they're saying that the lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity. What is the real knowledge of the living entity? The real knowledge of the living entity is that I am a spirit soul. I am residing in this body. I am not this body. This body may be mine for now, temporarily, but I have to use it in such a manner that I can come out of the cycle of birth and death and go back to my original home, which is Golok Vrindavan, which is Krishna's abode. So that is the real knowledge of the living entity. But that real knowledge is covered. That real knowledge is covered by what?
By lust.
Yes. Because we keep thinking that, oh, if I do this, I'll be very happy. If I get that, I'll be very happy. If I can, earn so much money, I'll be very happy. That is our estimation. But that estimation doesn't know that we can be truly happy eternally, not just for 5 days, but eternally. If we go back home, back to Krishna, back to Godhead, if we go back to Golok Vrindavan, then we will be eternally happy. So that is the real knowledge. But that knowledge is covered because lust says, oh, don't worry about all of that. Going back to God or anything. Lust says there's no God only. Lust makes us think that, okay, we can be happy by enjoying various material things. So that is the problem. Okay, so actually today let's do it slightly differently. We'll just have a little bit of reading of the purport too, so that it's nice and purifying for everybody. Then we can discuss that. So Tyaguji, if you want, you can read a little bit of the purport, and Sivan Prabhu also.
Yes, Ji, is it purport on text body, Prabhuji?
Yes, Tyaguji.
Okay, Ji, I'll read it. The enemy has, I'm going to read from my computer, Ji.
Yeah, that's fine.
The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus the mind is the reservoir of all the ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. The intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yashyatma buddhi kunape trida tuke swadik kala tradistu bama idayahi yatrida buddhi salitena kachich janes abanine sava gokara. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproduct of the body to be his kinsman, who considers the land of birth as worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered as ass or a cow. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Tavi. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Taviji. So, you see, this is very insightful. Prabhupada is explaining to us in a lot of detail here, where he says that how the spirit soul gets bewildered. And that is being explained. He says, mind is the center of all activities of the senses. And thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of ideas of sense gratification. So what are some examples of this? I mean, in order to make this easier to follow, we can just think about it or talk about it in everyday terms. So this mind is the center of all the activities of the senses. Okay, that makes sense. My mind tells my eyes to look at something. My mind tells my hand to touch something. My mind tells, my tongue what to eat and what to say. So mind is the center. We understand that. Mind is the center of all the activities of senses. Thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. So, for example, when the mind hears about sense objects, for example, if we think, oh, there are some rasgullas here, everybody likes rasgullas. Immediately when you see, if you are invited to a friend's house and they have rasgullas there, immediately you are thinking in your mind, okay, it'll be nice. I like to eat one. Okay, we'll wait till dinner is done and time for dessert. So the mind is telling you that there is the object of my senses, rasgulla is there. So just wait and then we'll eat and I'll enjoy the rasgulla. So this is the way the mind and the senses are working together. The key element here is the object of sense gratification. In this example, the object of sense gratification is rasgulla. It could be gulab jamun, it could be anything. So the point is, if the mind thinks that this is an enjoyable sense object, it will make plans for how to exploit it. Suppose you're walking past a garbage heap. You're not going to look at anything there and say, oh, this is very nice, I'll come and eat it. That is a pig's business. The pig will go and eat what is in the garbage heap. But a human being, our senses have their own ideas of what will be gratifying to our senses. So that is what is meant by the mind becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. So in our mind, we have many ideas of sense gratification, and we used one example, eating rasgulla. Now, then he says, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. mind and senses become the repositories of lust, meaning when, so to use this example, we go to a friend's house and for dinner and we see that, oh, in dessert they have gulab jamun today or rasgulla today, very nice. So then in our mind, we make a plan that at some point I must eat this. So this is what is desire. Now, desire is not a bad thing. We're not saying that eating a rasgulla is a bad thing. Krishna is not saying that eating a rasgulla is a bad thing. What he's saying is that we should check how our mind acts. If the rasgulla or the desire to eat the rasgulla drives us to do whatever it takes to eat the rasgulla, then we could be in trouble. Then we could be in trouble. So according to the Shastra, there are certain prescribed foods and there are certain foods that are not prescribed. Rasgulla is prescribed, it's okay. But how is it prescribed? If it is first offered to Krishna and then we eat it, then it becomes prasad. So then eating a rasgulla is not an act of sense gratification. So Prabhupada explains that even as devotees, we are human beings. If you're a human being, you have to gratify your senses. You have to eat something, you have to see something, you have to hear something, you have to talk something. But if those activities are related to Krishna, then those activities will not bind you in sinful action and reaction. But if they are not related to Krishna, then they will bind you in sinful action and reaction. So eating a rasgulla is not a bad thing, provided it is offered to Krishna. That same rasgulla, if you just eat it without offering, then it becomes an act of sense gratification. But if you eat it after offering to Krishna, then it is a very, very powerful method of actually purifying your senses, because it is Krishna Prasad. It purifies our senses, it strengthens our mind, or it cleanses our mind and it strengthens our intelligence. We'll keep this example in mind when we discuss Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, because he set some very good examples by his personal examples. So the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor. So intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities, means that over the course of our life, if you consider one life, let's say this life, from the day we were born till today, we have been seeing so many things, we've been eating so many things, and we have all these ideas in our mind that, oh, this is nice, that is nice, I would like to have this, I would like to have that. These propensities, they actually continue with us birth after birth. In fact, the kinds of propensities we have or we develop in this life, they will shape our next life. This is a very, very key point that the Bhagavad Gita makes, that our next life will be shaped by the propensities that we develop in this life. And this life, why are we in a human body? Why do we like to do certain things? Why do we not like to do certain things? Why do we have a particular nature? This is because of our previous life and our previous propensities. So that's why Bhagavad Gita says it is very important in this life. In this life, it is very important to cleanse our propensities so that we don't get another birth in this material world in our next life. If our propensities become that I want to serve Krishna, I am a servant of Krishna, I want to go back home, back to Godhead, Krishna will make the arrangements for us. And if we follow the regulative principles in this life, if we follow the principles of Shastra in this life, then Krishna will be happy to free us from this bondage of birth and death. So, intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. They sit in there, that is a storehouse of all the lustful propensities. And then Prabhupada said the intelligence department Excuse me. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself as matter, and thus the mind and senses. So what happens is when the intelligence becomes so full of, I want this, I want this, I want that, I want that, I want to enjoy this rasgulla, that thing, then the soul, because intelligence is influencing the soul thinks, oh, this is the most important thing. What my intelligence is telling me, spend time getting 100 rasgullas, spend time buying so many things, spend time getting this money, that money. The soul thinks that, okay, this is what life is all about. This is the important thing in life. So this is where the intelligence becomes completely materialistic. However, when we study Shastra, and like in this verse, Krishna is explaining to us what is the connection between senses, mind, intelligence, and the spirit soul, then we can make an effort to cleanse our intelligence, to cleanse our senses, to cleanse our mind, such that they dwell on the right thing, which is how to get out of this cycle of birth and death. And then that is further explained in this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, that a human being who identifies this body made of 3 elements with his self and considers the byproduct, etc. So the main point here is that if somebody thinks that this body, I am this body, who identifies this body made of 3 elements with his self, what are the 3 elements? Earth, water, air, fire, and ether, actually the 5 elements. So if we think that this body, which is made of these elements, is the real me, then that is a false understanding. So that is why this verse in Srimad Bhagavatam says that a person who thinks like that, and then because of that, who goes to place of pilgrimage simply to take bath, meaning somebody who's not trying to make use of this human birth to understand God and spirit, etc., then he's to be considered like an ass or cow, just like an animal. See, because then when we are not making use of our human intelligence is much higher than that of an animal. But if we cannot identify with our human intelligence the difference between the spirit soul and the body made of material elements, then there's no difference between us and an animal. So that is kind of the main point that is being made in this verse, that we have to cleanse our intelligence. If the intelligence is spiritualized, mind will become capable of controlling the senses. So that is why in the scripture, we have all these regulations. When we follow these regulations, that is, let's say no intoxication. Let's take that regulation. There are 4 relative principles, one of which is no intoxication. One is no gambling. Why? Because human beings have a tendency to indulge in intoxication, to indulge in gambling. And those things pollute our senses. The mind will start thinking, oh, intoxication is very nice. Instead of saying rasgulla is very nice, we think, oh, this alcohol is very nice. And we know what the effect of that is. You drink alcohol, you drink too much, and your brain is lost, your intelligence is lost, you behave in foolish ways. So that's why when the Shastra says don't indulge in intoxication, etc., the reason is that allows us to keep our mind and senses clean. That is just one simple example. So from this, we can switch over to Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj's life and how he kind of actually illustrated these principles in his own life. So, but anyway, before we do that, any questions or thoughts or comments, or if you would like to add something to what I said, let's do that.
Yeah, Prabhuji, very nice. You told, I remember that when you were saying that, at the last para, you read for that, that is not difference like considered to be a ass or a cow. Prabhupada Maharaj mentioned, like if we do not differentiate ourselves, like if we are not able to control the mind. So like there is dharmo hi adhika visesu dharmo hina pasivi samana. So like we have the intelligence to like distinguish ourselves as a human being, because those things are not there in the animals. So like yeah, ahar nidra bhai mathanam cha samane tat pasvi nar nara dharma hi adhika vesasya dharma hina pasivi samana. So ahar, what we are eating, nidra, mathanam, the reproduction. So these all things are, we are also having, animals are also having. So if we do not understand ourselves, what is for what purpose we have come in this body, so then we are simply an animal. So we have to understand really who we are, why we are, and why we have come here.
Right.
So our eternal service is to serve Krishna, and then to go back to home, back to God. Yeah, Prabhu. And another one also you mentioned that was very good, like Bhumi Rapo Nalavayo, on that one, like four things are there. So by that this material body is created, and then if we do not understand like how things are, how this body is getting control, like then it will be part of like our false ego, and those things will be dominated. So very well you give that example of the chariot, that the lust controls the senses, then mind, then intelligence, then a spirit. So that was a very nice, Prabhuji explained. If anybody others can comment, so fine. Otherwise you can move to the Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts or questions, comments, Tyaguji, Narasimhan Prabhu, Mataji?
Yes, thank you, Prabhuji, for
No, Ji, thank you.
I was just thinking that, like you mentioned about how the lust enters through the senses and mind and intelligence, and then about the four regulative principles, that how we have the whole process given by our acharyas on how we can overturn, and think, become Krishna conscious in one life by following the process that is given to us mercifully by our acharyas, so that can go back to Godhead. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so we'll move on to Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, a little bit of his glorification. So Wednesday was the disappearance day of Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, and as we all know, Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj was the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada. And so Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj is the son of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So born in a very, very auspicious and accomplished Vaishnava family. His father was an acharya. He also took on the service of being an acharya. So it's very interesting that actually when he was born, as was the custom those days, they would always have an astrologer come and make the the horoscope, etc. And his horoscope indicated, the astrologer said that this boy, when he was born, the name was given to him was Bimal Prasad, and that Bimal Prasad will become a very famous and accomplished preacher worldwide of the glories of the Supreme Lord. So from his birth, from his birth chart itself, it was kind of predicted that he would be a very great devotee of the Lord. And so one very interesting incident happened when he was about 6 months old. Actually, at that time, his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, was stationed at Jagannath Puri. He was a high government official there, the district magistrate, probably, if I remember right, which was a very senior position, and very rarely would an Indian-bodied person in those British times get these sorts of positions. Because Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was born in 1874, 16th of February, 1874. So he was just about 6 months old, and they used to live in Jagannath Puri, and their house was on the main road on which the Jagannath Rath Yatra used to take place. So that was the annual festival of Rath Yatra was taking place, and as the Lord, by the Lord's desire, when the chariots were being pulled past Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house, the chariot stopped. Now, as you all may know, the Jagannath Puri Rath Yatra is a massive affair. There are lakhs of people who come for the Rath Yatra, and the Rath is actually pulled by several hundred men. And so they were pulling and pulling and pulling. The Rath would not move because, it was the will of the Lord. The Rath was stuck. And so at that time, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj's mother took this opportunity, and she said, "Oh, the Rath has stopped right in front of our house." She took Bimal Prasad in her arms, and with some help, she got up on the chariot, and she wanted her son to be blessed by Lord Jagannath. So she took her baby there, and by the Lord's will, a garland fell from Jagannathji and went straight onto the baby Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. So, of course, at that time, so Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very thrilled. He was happy. He said, "This is the blessing of Lord Jagannath, that by his will, the garland has come and fallen around Bimal Prasad's neck." And so then when his mother came down from the chariot, and they were still trying to pull it on, the chariot started to move. So these things are hard to explain as to why it happened, except that you can see that this was the Lord's plan. He had sent a very great devotee of his to come and preach his glories. And he was in the Lord indicated by this small example that, one, the Lord can do whatever he wants, and two, he's indicating through his actions in various ways for us to pick up and recognize what is the Lord's desire. So the Rath stopped outside Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house. Hundreds of people were pulling it. It didn't move till Lord Jagannath blessed Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj with the garland. And then, not that they did anything different, the Rath started to move. So hard to explain what happened, but these are the facts. This happened in the year 1874. And so anyway, so from that point on, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very convinced. He had been praying for a son who would continue Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teaching and the desire to spread the glories of the holy name. And so he knew that this is the son, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur then trained Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj in various ways, scriptures and all sorts of things from very young age. And the interesting thing is, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was exceptionally bright. At a very young age, between 5 to 7 years, he memorized all 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita, and he could recite them. Now, even before that, as a little boy, as a 2 or 3 years old boy, he demonstrated the principle of sense control. So when we were talking about this example on the Rasgulla and how we should control our senses and not get controlled by the objects of the senses. So Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, at the tender age of 2 or 3 years old, a young little boy, he used to like mangoes. He loved mangoes. And so one day Bhaktivinoda Thakur brought mangoes home. And Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, very young little boy, he was excited. Before the mangoes could be offered, he went and he ate one. So when Bhaktivinoda Thakur Maharaj came to know, he called Bimal Prasad and he said, we don't do like that. We must always offer the food to Krishna first and then eat it. So this small 2-3-year-old boy, being the special person that he is, demonstrated a very big principle. He said, I have committed an offense to the Lord. This is not right. I should not have done that. I take a vow that I will never eat mangoes the rest of my life. So throughout his life, he did not touch mangoes. It was so these are special people, and by their acts, they set examples. The example basically ties very nicely to our verse 40, that the senses, the mind, and the intelligence, these are the sitting places of this lust. Lust is the desire to enjoy an object of the senses. And Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said, this desire to enjoy this mango without offering to Krishna came into my mind. So now to cleanse my mind, I will never eat mangoes again. So that's why the principle that we try to follow is that we never eat anything that has not been offered to the Lord first. So after all, we have to eat to survive. It's okay to eat nicely, but eat offered food, eat Krishna Prasad. So then as Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj's life progressed, went to school, went to college, he was a very, very bright, very exceptionally bright person. He excelled in math and astrology. And of course, he's written many books, and we all read his explanations on the Brahma Samhita. And when you read that, you basically need a dictionary to sit beside you, because it's hard to understand. The vocabulary that he uses is so advanced that it is difficult to understand everything that he's written without the help of a dictionary. So this is the caliber of Bhaktisiddhanta. And this is just from a very simple academic standpoint, we can see how exceptional a person he was. He was a great devotee of the Lord, plus he had the material intelligence as well to do the work that he had been sent for, which is to translate books, publish books, and distribute books, and distribute this knowledge about Krishna. So then in the year 1898, when he was 24 years old, Bhaktivinoda Thakur encouraged him to take initiation from Gorakishore Das Babaji Maharaj. And of course, there was a whole story about how Gorakishore Das Babaji, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur sent Bimal Prasad to Gorakishore Das Babaji Maharaj, at that time, at 24 years of age, Bimal Prasad was a very, very intelligent, educated, bright young man. And Gorakishore Das Babaji Maharaj was supposedly illiterate. And so when Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj went to him, he was tested by Gorakishore Das Babaji. He kept saying, no, I will not accept you as a disciple. Because, Gorakishore Das Babaji wanted to test Bimal Prasad's sincerity. There's a whole story about how then Bimal Prasad demonstrated his sincerity to Gorakishore Das Babaji and finally got initiation from him. But the main the analogy or the principle that I wanted to kind of tie into today's discussion of verse 40 was this thing about controlling the senses and about the mango example of Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, where as a little boy, he demonstrated to us that it's possible to make a pledge, take it seriously, and follow up with it. And when we do that, it will help in our spiritual progress. Anything else, Prabhuji, that you would like to add? There's a lot about him, but I wanted to give others a chance to, Narasimha Prabhu or Ramchandra Prabhu or Mataji, Tyaguji, anybody would like to add something more to this?
Yeah, very well, Prabhuji. You most of the points you cover, which are very familiar. Since he was guru of Srila Prabhupada, so I think we from our gross mind, I mean this small mind, we small intelligence, we cannot glorify all. So whatever fits to our mind, we can glorify. But most of the point I covered, Prabhuji, was good. Yeah.
One quick thing that I remembered, like our acharyas, they were also people who were leading practical lives, and they kind of understood things things like when there are politics involved. Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj and all, they were very intelligent. They were in touch with the worldly ways also. So while Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was, when he became a sannyasi and he was preaching, actually one of the things before he actually started his preaching work, first he said that I'm going to chant 3 billion names of the Lord before I undertake this task of spreading the holy names. And so that took him 9 years, and he used to chant every day about 170 rounds. We chant 16 rounds a day. He did 170 in one day. It's unfathomable for us how a person can do it. But basically about 16 hours a day he was chanting.
Yeah.
16 hours a day. And so through the power of that chanting, through the power of that immense tapasya, he proved that if we take shelter of the holy name of the Lord sincerely, then the Lord will empower us to serve him. So when he finished this chanting, then he started the work of preaching. And then, you see, he was very powerful. When he would speak, people would get convinced. So what happened is that there were many, so-called Brahmins of the time who became envious. And so somebody actually made a plot to kill him. And they bribed some police people and said that, please don't interfere, but here is what is going to happen. So the police person had a lot of respect for Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, and he came and he told him. So Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, then he just left from there and he relocated. So you see, the point is that even in devotional life, there are many challenges that come up. But somehow, if one is faithful to the Lord, dependent on the Lord will somehow come and protect. So Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was alerted and he left and went to a safe place. But Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, so his chanting was a very, very famous pastime of his, that for 9 years chanted 170 rounds approximately every day till he completed 3 names, and then he went around with his preaching. So, all right.
Yeah. One thing I remember, Prabhuji, I think when we were watching that Abhay Charnam serial, which was directed by Bhakti Charu Maharaj. So he he shown like once for this Hindu society, and there is the impulse Mayavadis. They had the kind of context and fight, like, kind of there. So it was with Bhakti Vinod Thakur Maharaj. They invited Bhakti Vinod Thakur Maharaj as a challenging from the Hindutva, and they were Mayavadis, who is going to win, that means which principles are strong, and who is, in this Hindutva, what kind of things are there, whether the God is existing, not existing, this kind of thing. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur Maharaj's health was down on that day. He was sick, and still he wanted to go. So, but he cannot walk. So on that day, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj, Bimal Prasad, was he was young, but he was just practicing under Bhakti Vinod Thakur Maharaj. So he went there, and by the blessing of, by the mercy of Krishna, and Krishna reciprocated, and he performed so better that all public, they are Mayavadis and Hindutva, all they were, they got very, very impressed, and they started glorifying there. So that was somewhere. So that was very, in the beginning only, means he was kind of bright and shining. I wanted to say, like, means he was having the blessing of Bhakti Vinod Thakur Maharaj and mercy of Krishna directly. So he was able to, show to the society, and he saved the societies, such kind of things. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Prabhu. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions or thoughts? Otherwise, we'll stop.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Okay.
Prabhuji, just wanted to share some pastimes I had heard about Bhakti
Yes.
Siddhanta. That anyone who took his darshan, like he was known as Singha Guru, Lion Guru, so they could feel that he was only dependent on the Supreme Lord, right from how his appearance was next to all the devotees. And then you mentioned about his Namvrat that he had for so many years, and when he was towards the end of his chanting of those many years, then a devotee requested him to preach, and at that time he was so absorbed in his chanting that he was in Mayapur, and he said that Gaur Nitaya right here, and he blissfully jumped into the Ganga, and later on he came into preaching. And then there was one more pastime, Prabhuji, when Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was young. That time a saint had visited their home, and the sadhu put his feet on Bhakti Vinod Thakur's head. He bowed down and he kept his feet, giving blessings to him. And then Bimal Prasad was also present there, and he was quite outspoken. So he said, "Do you know who Bhakti Vinod Thakur is?" And then Bhakti Vinod Thakur asked him to just show him, more respect. He's a sadhu like that. So right from childhood, he was a very exceptional person.
Outspoken. Yeah. Very nice, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, Prabhuji, I wanted to just clarify. I have heard many times. Thank you, Narasimha Prabhuji, for bringing this point. This Lion Guru. So, because he was very technically in the scriptures, technically he was very sound. So he was very bold in giving the answer. So that's what he was called Lion Guru, or there was some other reason. If you can clarify, Prabhuji.
No, that was basically the reason. So he was called Singha Guru because he would preach very forcefully, and he never accepted any misrepresentation of Shastra, which sometimes happens, you see. So he was very outspoken, and he would preach very forcefully and establish his point by references from scripture. It was not that I'm saying it, so it's right. He always gave references from scripture and proved his point, and he proved it very convincingly. And that's why the episode that you were referring to, where at the conference of the Hindu Sammelan, where there were representatives from different branches of the Hindu philosophy, when Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj started to speak, he quoted from Shastra, and so it was very convincing, and everybody accepted his conclusions because he explained it from Shastra. So that's why he was called Singha Guru. He was very convincing in his explanations.
Right. Yeah, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Prabhuji.
We'll call off the
Thank you all very much. We'll plan to
Thank you,
meet
Prabhuji.
next week.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha
उत्तरव्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, शिला प्रभुपाद की जय।
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna ji.